everyone, and welcome to The Darkest Hour. I'm your host, Amanda Jane. I wanted to start out tonight's episode a bit different by giving a warm welcome to all of my newest subscribers, and a huge thanks to all of you for the channel support. Also, I want to give the biggest shout out and thank you to the great Mortis Media for having me as a guest narrator on his Let's Not Meet series. If you're somehow a fan of me, but you haven't heard of him, well, do yourself a favor and check out Mortis Media. I've linked his channel and our episode in the description of tonight's video. Now, we've got a good amount of stories to get to tonight, and I'm ready to get scared. So, let's get started, shall we? I'm a first-time poster. My friend told me I should make an account and share this story here. It's actually my grandpa's story. He retired in 2015 from the Lake and Peninsula School District in Alaska. He worked in the transportation department, traveling among several rural schools around Chignik, driving the few children who attended back and forth from their homes in a small white rickety bus. But it had, and I quote, a stacked horn that sounds like a train caboose to scare the wolves. This was a weird comment, so I asked, why do you scare the wolves? Kind of grossed out that he invested money into a stacked horn just to startle the wildlife. He says, no, for protection. Chignik had a big wolf problem about a decade ago. That peaked during 2010. One Monday evening, a 32-year-old special education teacher, who for privacy purposes we'll call Kathy, was preparing for a jog. Having recently moved from Pennsylvania, she was an outdoor enthusiast and avid runner, looking forward to exploring the trails of her new community near Chignik Lake. Reviewing a route that she'd created on an app on her phone, she turned on her playlist, popped in her earbuds, and began her run on the deserted 3-mile road leading out from the village to its small airstrip. About an hour in, she was nearing her halfway point when Kathy noticed the route ahead was blocked by 2 big wolves. This being her first time probably ever experiencing a real wild animal in its natural environment, she didn't know what to do in the instance that you came across a wolf. But it probably wouldn't have helped her much anyways in this scenario, because when she turned around to run in the opposite direction, she discovered 4 more wolves had approached from behind, now surrounding the 5-foot school teacher. The 6 wolves then proceeded to attack and kill Kathy. Her body was found by snowmobilers a short time after the attack. It had been dragged off the road, and her body had been partially eaten. What internal organs remained were spread out down the road from the wolves. The police said that she was in an unrecognizable condition. Chunks of her face and neck were missing. Her items, her phone, were the only means to identify who she was. This was obviously a horror show for the village, with the parents opting to drive their children to and from school, and all recesses being moved to indoors for the remainder of the year. My grandpa said it took a few days for a group of hunters to locate and shoot down the wolves, confirming they were Kathy's assailants by human DNA still being in their stomachs, later confirmed to be Kathy's. My grandpa said the weirdest part was that none of these wolves were starving or sick with rabies. They just seemingly attacked this woman, unprovoked. The shaken-up community still hasn't recovered from the tragedy. Not fully, anyway. They were broken when they were forced to gaze upon the extreme violence. Violence that was offered up by the natural, lurking predators within their otherwise serene village. And on that, I'll end this with how I see a lot of people conclude their stories. So, scary pack of wolves that ate a school teacher back in 2010? Let's not meet. So this happened about 8 years ago, when I was 16. I've always believed in the paranormal, but this was definitely my most real and frightening experience. I was living with my dad, and one of his jobs at the time was a janitor at a daycare, so I would help him out sometimes. I should also preface with saying that at the time, my dad did not believe in the paranormal at all, and he'd spent his whole adult life literally working in the death industry. He'd owned a cremation business, worked at multiple funeral homes, done body removal, and been an assistant to autopsies. He had just started doing janitor work after he sold the cremation business at the time, and again, did not at all believe ghosts were real. Anyways, one evening at around 7 or 8, we went to the daycare. It was summertime in Canada, so it was still sunny and bright out. We get out to the daycare, and once unlocking the door and turning off the alarm, we both hear a very loud and very clear child's laughter from the room right beside the front door. We both stop and just stare at each other for about 30 seconds. Then, my dad starts walking around the daycare saying, "Hello? Hello?" and checking every room. When he doesn't find anyone, he comes back, and we're both in total disbelief. We couldn't believe what we heard. The laugh was so loud and human-like. It was too real. So we cleaned the daycare, myself absolutely terrified. And my dad became a believer that day. He set up cameras when he was cleaning for weeks after that. He never caught anything, but it was still pretty wild. We checked for toys that made noise and couldn't rationally explain it in any way. The doors were locked, lights off, and alarm on when we entered. When I was younger, 17, I lived in a small village of 1,200 people. Usually, every year there's a local town festival, and all of the adults go for dinner and a party at the town hall, where they perform some acting and make fun of the year that's just passed. Usually this is in February, so it's snowy and dark pretty early. When this festival is happening, absolutely all 13 to 17-year-old girls are booked for babysitting. Me and my 2 friends went for a drive around the town, since you have to be 18 to go to the party. We just drove around, giving people a lift to the party and earning some extra cash. Since there's no taxi in this town, it's a great way to earn some extra pocket money. We had been driving for a couple of hours. Of course, we knew where everyone lived, so some of the adults asked us to drive past their house to make sure everything was all right, to give the parents some extra comfort. I think it was also to give us some sort of tasks until the party was over and we could give them a lift home. In one of the older neighborhoods in town, there were low streetlights, so we just drove slowly. One mom who we gave a lift to earlier lived there. She was a widow with 3 young children, 2, 4, and 8, if I recall correctly, and her niece was babysitting. She was 15. The time was around 10 p.m., and when we drove in this neighborhood, which is surrounded by hills and cliffs. My friend swore that he saw something move in her garden. We thought little of it and just said it was probably a cat or something. We kept driving to the other end of the town, but my friend, in the back seat, said he had a really bad feeling and he wanted to drive back to her house. So we did, to check to see if we could see footprints in the snow. When we got there, we parked the car and looked over the fence, and there were fairly new human footprints in the snow, adult size. So we all looked at each other and decided to follow the trail. The trail went past all the bedrooms, but near every window, the footprints turned to the window, like someone was trying to peek in. Eventually, the trail ended on the street, and we lost it where the snowplow had been earlier that night. We chatted about whether we should go and get the mom from the party or ring the doorbell to check if everything was all right. Since none of the tracks led to the back door or the front door, we decided that two of us would stay in the neighborhood, hidden, and monitor the house, while the other would drive to the police station and pick up the mom on the way back. That was a good call. Maybe 5 minutes after he left for the police station, we saw someone lurking behind one of the garages a couple houses down. He wasn't moving, just sat there with a cigarette. We watched from a distance, since he couldn't see us. Then he stood up, looked around, and started to creep to the house where the mom lived. And he walked to the back door. Without thinking, my friend and I ran through the two gardens that were between where we were and the mom's house so that we could catch him as he was trying to enter the back door. We arrived just in time. He was trying to open the door when we shouted at him, "What the fuck are you doing?" And he made a run for it, so we followed. He ran down the street to get some speed ahead of us, but we were both pretty athletic, so we were gaining on him. This was the most intense moment of our life. I remember the only thing I was thinking was not to slip and lose momentum. The end of the street was approaching, and the next turn would be 90 degrees to the right. So instead of slowing down, I jumped off the street so that I could intercept him after he would lose speed by taking the turn. My calculation was wrong, and he managed to take the turn without losing much speed. I spent too much energy sprinting in the foot-deep snow, and I knew that I would have to slow down. I was still about 10 meters behind him, but my friend was closer and gaining on him. When my friend realized that he could kick his feet and trip him, he did. He fell, and this was the quickest takedown ever. He'd smashed his head to the frozen ground, and he was out. While we were catching our breath, he didn't move. We rolled him over on his back, and he was breathing, but really shallow, with a cracking noise. I was terrified. Millions of questions came to my head. Is he dying? What if this was just some relative making a prank? Why did we chase him? Meanwhile, my friend checked his pocket, and there was adult lubricant, a strong sedative, and a broken camera. Luckily, the driver came a couple of minutes after, with the mom and the police. Then the ambulance arrived and took him away. The day after, we were brought into a police station for questioning, and the chief told us that the man was a known pedophile, not from our town, and that we for sure saved the day, and probably more kids, since the tumble that the guy took. It gave him bleeding in the brain, and he's not able to wipe himself anymore. We told him the story, and when my friend said he tripped him, the chief stopped typing, and he said, "Are you sure you tripped him?" The way I see it is you three heroes caught a burglar in the act, and while he was running away, he fell and hit his head. He looked at us and nodded with a soft smile. But thinking back, this perv must have planned this, knowing when the festival was, knowing that she was a single mom, picking out that house. Knowing that gives me the creeps. When I was around 6 years old, I saw something very scary. Sometimes it even gives me chills to this day. I was in a room with my grandma and asked her where the toy bear that I liked was. She said it was in her room and the lights were out. When I was about to turn them on, I saw it was right in the corner. A boy, a little bit taller than me, had shorts and no shirt, relatively skinny and short hair. What was even weirder than that, he was emanating some kind of smoke, a dark smoke or something. I felt like something was very wrong, and he started to walk towards me while I froze. I could see his eyes, but that's about it. No expression, because his body was almost entirely darkness. Then I felt someone behind me. It was my grandma, with a shocked look on her face. She turned the lights on and he disappeared, but some traces of smoke flew out the window. What scared me the most on this was the reaction. She was scared. She drove me to some sort of church or spiritism center. It's called something like that in Brazil. I guess it was to make sure that it doesn't happen again. It worked, but still, her room gives me the creeps to this day. So when I was around 2 or 3 years old, my mom and dad, now divorced, were friends with this couple who worked with my dad at his office. They would always ask to babysit me and loved seeing me a lot, and my parents thought nothing of it. One day, they asked to take me to Disney World, along with their niece. My mom had no issue with it. My dad, on the other hand, thought it was weird because they offered to pay for everything for me. He told them no and made up an excuse for me not to go. The couple wasn't seen for weeks after that, and the company my dad and they worked for were having an investigation because of that same couple who wanted to take me to Disney World. They'd committed massive fraud. They stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. They disappeared, and my dad has no idea what happened to them, since he no longer works there. But he fully believes that they wanted to take me and disappear with me. He thinks that they couldn't have kids on their own and really wanted one. But it still creeps me out that I could have a completely different life and family. Thank God my dad was home because my mom wanted to let me go. The time was around 1 a.m., and my cousin's brother and I were craving the late-night McDonald's run. I lived near the edge of the city where the highway begins and the strawberry fields were. It was a quiet evening, and my car was parked near the highway. There was a metal fence that separated where my car was parked and the highway. As we're heading back to my car, we see this white truck speeding down the highway, going way over 100 miles an hour. It's speeding towards us like a bat out of hell. Nothing too unusual about this, since it was late in the evening and it was a part of the road where cops were never posted at. So, as they're getting closer to us, we're about to hop into my car, and right when that happens, we hear a loud sound of something slamming onto the highway, and the white truck suddenly stops. The four of us jerked our heads to see what it was, and we saw a buildup of tire smoke that surrounded the truck. That's how hard the truck had come to a halt. As the smoke clears, I see that there's a body laying face down on the road. My heart drops when I have no idea what just happened. The white truck is just idling in the middle of the highway for a few seconds before it takes off down the highway again. My worst fear is that this is a case of a hit and run, and I wasn't able to get a license plate for the truck. The four of us were not in the best state, especially with how late it was, so the best that we could do is just watch in horror as we see this seemingly lifeless body laying in the road. He isn't moving, yelling in pain, or showing any signs of life. I want to rush towards the guy, and right when I make a move, my brother stops me and tells me that the truck is coming back. I see that the truck is reversing the entire way, and none of us know what's going to happen next. The driver of the white truck rolls down its window and screams,
"Get back in the truck!"
To our relief, the person slowly gets up and makes their way back into the truck. In a few short moments, the truck was now gone, and it was as if nothing had happened. We were all hoping that this was just one of those cases where a drunken buddy accidentally opens their car door and falls out, and nothing more sinister, such as someone trying to escape a trafficker. This experience has to be my most memorable. So one time, me and my brother were walking up the stairs. I was around 10 at the time. My brother was around 5. And in the game room, there was an old lady, knitting. She was looking down and rocking in an old rocking chair. We both looked at each other. I didn't know if I was just seeing things. We both had seen her. And we didn't wait for her to look up. Instead, we ran downstairs as fast as we could, screaming bloody murder. Note, my great-grandma died 2 years before this, so I thought it was her. But my grandma said her mother never used that chair and never knit. We ended up selling the rocking chair, and I haven't seen her since. This happened in mine and my husband's first house, several months after our oldest son was born. We lived in the house for almost 4 years before he arrived, but we'd never experienced anything like this before. It's actually the only time I've ever experienced something I'd consider paranormal, whereas my husband claims his grandma's home was haunted growing up. Either way, this experience shook the both of us in a whole new way. We'd finally decided to move our son into his nursery. For the first 6 or 7 months, he slept in our room, in his own bassinet. But we decided it was time to get him adjusted to his crib in his bedroom. So we gathered our strength and made it happen. We dug out the baby monitors that my mom had gotten us months prior to set up security, if you will. Granted, this was 1997, so they weren't anything fancy, but enough to help us feel better about our choice to move our son to his room. In addition to the baby monitors, we'd put one of those moving night lights in his room, the ones where the lampshade would project pictures onto the wall, moving slowly. This one was made up of friendly, fun sea creatures, and our son loved it. The first night that we actually slept separately from our son, we both woke up at the same time. My husband looked at me, and we listened to the monitor for a minute, but it was quiet. It didn't appear that our son had woken us up. So what had happened? I almost just went back to sleep, calling it jitters. But my husband sort of grabbed my arm, not hard or anything, but firm, and he whispered, "What the hell?" while looking straight ahead. Following his gaze, I could see that each of the 4 dresser drawers had been pulled open. I turned on the light and we both hopped out of bed. It was around 2 a.m., and we were not sure what was going on. So we didn't really speak out loud, just with our eyes. My husband grabbed his military knife and motioned for me to follow him. I did, and he handed me another smaller knife, which I held tight, continuing to follow his lead. Me against the wall, him in front of me, walking towards the baby's room, and leaving no blind spots as we did. When we got to the room, my husband opened the door, swiftly and with force, but quietly. Just our son, fast asleep. No one else. My husband tells me to stay with the baby while he checks the house. I ask him to please call 911, and he tells me that as soon as he gets downstairs, he will. And he says he's going to shut the door. Once he does, I set the knife down, and I pick up my son and sit, rocking him back and forth, staring off at the fun sea creatures dancing on the walls. It was comforting. After sitting or rocking for a while, I start to feel a bit warmer. Not a fever or anything, but best described as how it feels when someone sits real close to you. You can feel their body heat. While feeling this, I'm looking down at my son, debating if he looks or feels warm, but he looks comfortable, still sleeping soundly. Suddenly, a mitten on my son's left hand flies off in a way that it might if someone had ripped it off hastily. He wasn't moving his hands, and this hadn't woken him up, but it got me up. I was now standing, breathing a bit heavier and wondering where in the heck my husband was. Moments later, my husband opens the door. It scared me at first. I just really wanted the sound of footsteps approaching to be his footsteps. When they were indeed his, I was so relieved. I leaned over and hugged him with my open arm, telling him rapidly, "We gotta get out of this room." He wasn't whispering any longer, telling me, "Okay, let's go back to our room, or even downstairs." He started to shuffle us out, saying the police were going to send someone by. He said that he checked everywhere in the house, and that no one could possibly be inside. He seemed to feel better, but I was still a bit afraid. We made our way to the family room, which was on the first floor. Center of the house, really. You could see the whole area from the top of the stairs and from 2 of the bedroom doorways, our room and the baby's room. From where I was sitting, I could see the nightlight reflecting off my son's walls, so I watched them again. This time, I was a little bit wary of the room, though. I couldn't help but wonder what the heck I had actually experienced up there. But I just tried to keep my cool while we waited for the police. My husband asks me what I'm staring at, and I told him our son's room, and then I told him what I'd felt in there, which at first he sort of smiled at. But then, in all sincerity, he told me, "Maybe it's a ghost." To which I said, "Excuse me?" He didn't elaborate, Probably the loud knock on the front door. The police were here now, and they were waiting for us to let them in. Long story short, there was no guy, no person, at least not in our house, and not the surrounding areas. The officers had checked as soon as my husband's call came in. It was a rather quiet night in town. I wasn't having it, though, at least not that night. I told my husband, let's get a hotel, have our parents and such search the place again tomorrow. He said he would stay at the house, but send me and our son to his mom's house. And so that's where we went. By the next night, maybe even 2 nights had passed, my husband had convinced me to come home. We were on the phone and he told me that the home was fine. He had decided that maybe we had overreacted. For a bit, I guess I agreed with him. When he picked us up from his mom's later that day, I asked him what he thought about the mitten incident, the one that flew off of our son's hand. He just smiled again, and I asked, what about? And he just said he thought I had nothing to worry about. Think of it like a guardian angel or something. No harm has come of this thing, right? I told him that he couldn't be serious, that if he thought our house was haunted, let's go, like now, back to his mom's. Then we sort of found a way to laugh it off. Finally. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I was very excited to sleep in our bed, happy to be home, and I actually felt sort of silly for making such a fuss. My husband put our son down in his room, and then he joined me on the couch with the baby monitor. I remember laying there as we sort of nodded off and watched some late-night TV. Above the TV are the 2 bedroom doors. My peripherals are on my son's bedroom doorway, but I'm only keeping it there in the event that something about it changes. Nodding in and out a bit, and then I'm wide awake, sitting straight up. My husband saying something like, whoa, or what's wrong, but I just turn his head to the upstairs, and he sees the same thing that I am. The fun sea creature light is spinning rapidly, or at least it's projecting as though it is. I tell my husband to go and turn it off. Just as I do, we hear some sort of sound, maybe something falling or moving. We know that it came from our son's room, though, because we hear it both inside the house and through the baby monitor. He hops up, runs upstairs, heads into the room, and he's gone for a minute. When he comes back out, the baby is in his arms, and he also has the diaper bag. He calmly asks me to grab our bags, which were still by the door, and to follow him to the car. We get settled into the car, and he tells me that he needs to run inside and grab some overnight stuff and to lock the doors. Then he's gone. So I do. I lock the doors, and I turned on the headlights, just wanting to illuminate all the darkness. Husband dashes outside. He's got a handful of stuff, and without a word, he buckles in and starts to back out of the driveway. We start heading back to his mom's house. I hadn't even asked what happened up to this point, but 5 or so minutes into driving, I had to know. He was checking to see if the baby was asleep, like he could actually understand what he was about to tell me. It was sweet, but also a little unsettling, because he, my not scared of anything husband, was truly scared. After a while, he just said, "We're going to stay with Mom for a minute and then figure out the rest later. Maybe sell the damn place. It's too small anyways." I remember thinking, sell the house? I didn't say it though. He just looked uncomfortable, trying to get more out, but having a hard time saying it. It opened up his drawers. When I went up there, the light was going nuts and his drawers were wide open. We can't stay there. And so we didn't. We got our stuff, but we never stayed there again. And we didn't bring our son there. In the end, we had the place blessed, handed over the keys, and haven't really ever looked back, other than to talk about remember when, which isn't exactly frequent. Basically, I don't miss that house, not even a little bit. Well, friends, we have indeed reached the end of tonight's episode. But don't forget to join me every Friday night for a brand new episode of The Darkest Hour. Do you have stories like these? Send them to me, amandadarkesthour@gmail.com. Many thanks to everyone for sharing their stories, and thank you again to everyone for listening and subscribing. Because if you love The Darkest Hour, and you never want it to end, be sure to subscribe, tap the notification bell, and tell all your friends. Till next time, stay spooky.